Good evening, guys. Welcome to my live stream. Today is Sunday, March 29, 2026, and today we're going to talk about the SDSU Aztecs series win over GCU in the Mountain West Conference. We're also going to be talking about the flashback the SDSU Aztecs baseball team had 2 years ago, which we're going to talk about later in this live stream. We're also going to be talking about the highlights between the San Diego Padres and Detroit Tigers from the March 28th game. And we're also going to be talking about what's going on in the NCAA Baseball, as well as the standings for each conference. So if you guys like more of the sports content as well as some baseball content, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and let's get started. So first of all, we're going to start off with, SDSU won 7-2 against GCU in the series finale. Therefore, the Aztecs got the series win in the Mountain West Conference. Here are the highlights. So, during the first inning, Jake Jackson hit a 2-run home run, in which Tice Peterson scored from second base. And then in the fourth inning, Adam Macpock singled to right center field, in which Jake Jackson scored from second base. So this was an RBI single. And then still during fourth inning, Dawson Santana singled in the infield, and so he bunted for an RBI single, in which Adam Macpock scored. Max Farrell advanced to third base. And then during the fourth inning, we're still during the fourth inning, Zane Kelly had an RBI sac bunt to the infield, which allowed Max Farrell to score. Zane Kelly was out at first base. That's unfortunate, but Javen Trotsky, who went 3 for 5, hit an RBI single, in which allowed Dawson Santana to score from second base. And then, although GCU Lopes unfortunately scored 2 more runs, which trimmed the lead to 4 runs. However, during the 7th inning, Max Farrell, the first baseman, hit an RBI single to shallow center field, in which Jake Jackson scored from second base to give the Aztecs a 7-2 lead. And then, as far as pitching goes, Alec Bellardis, wow. Alec Bellardis was very impressive on the mound. He pitched 6.2 innings pitched, struck out 4 batters, only allowed 4 hits and 2 runs, and 2 were earned. And then Connor Abadie went on to pitch in relief. He pitched 2.1 innings, only allowed 1 hit, and so both Alec Bellardis and Connor Abadie went on for a combined 5-hitter, which didn't allow GCU to hit as much. And therefore, Alec Bellardis got his second win as an SDSU baseball pitcher. For a guy who transferred from Arizona State, the breaking ball in which he threw towards the strike zone didn't allow GCU batters to hit as much, which makes him a very special pitcher for the SDSU Aztecs. Him alongside Roman Leto and Drew Talavs, they create a very impressive pitching rotation under Coach Ken Vance. And, that's why we've been winning more games than we have ever had before. And so, the Aztecs got a series win after, yesterday's game, we won 12-11 in a wild game. Tice Peterson was clutch with a 3-run home run, which gave the Aztecs a 12-9 lead. Although GCU scored 2 more runs, Bryce Midnight shut the door on the Lopes, in which gave the Aztecs a 12-11 victory. So now next up, we got the flashback from 2 years ago. Let me say this. To this day, 2 years ago, March 29th, 2024, we got to witness another history made by the SDSU Aztecs baseball team. Jacob Riordan threw a no-hitter against the University of New Mexico when the Aztecs won 13-0. In terms of the stats, he pitched the whole game, which is 7 innings. This is a run rule victory for the Aztecs. 0 hits given up, 0 runs given up, which is expected for a no-hitter. He also struck out 8 batters and only walked 6. So in terms of stats, they're very impressive. His no-hitter was the Aztecs' 9th no-hitter in the history of baseball. Before this no-hitter, TJ Fontaine threw a no-hitter when the Aztecs won 4-0 over the Nevada Wolfpack. Next up, we got San Diego Padres against the Detroit Tigers on March 28th. So Padres won 3-0, so therefore they got their first win of the season under new manager Craig Stammen. Here are the highlights. One of them was that during the 3rd inning, Fernando Tatis Jr. hit an RBI single to give the Aztecs a 1-0 lead. And then next up, when Manny Machado was at bat, there has been a throwing error in which allowed Jake Cronenworth to score, therefore giving the Padres a 2-0 lead. After the bases were loaded for the San Diego Padres, Jackson Merrill was at bat, and Jackson Merrill hit a force out, and although Manny Machado was out at second base, however, Jake Cronenworth scored on the home plate, in which gives the Padres a 3-0 lead. And what's cool about it was Mason Miller's entrance with a walkout song, which seems epic. You might want to watch. You might want to watch this in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. That is epic. Iconic. This song is called Blind by Korn. If you haven't listened to the song, maybe it's never too late to do that. Maybe you can do that anytime. In my opinion, Mason Miller's entrance song is better than Edwin Diaz's entrance song. Like when Edwin Diaz pitches with Los Angeles Dodgers. And when Mason Miller was on the mound for the San Diego Padres. He struck out 2 batters, including that drop third strike. Including that drop third strike on Kevin McConaughey, in which allowed the San Diego Padres to win 3-0. Anyways, the next thing we're going to talk about is what's going on in the NCAA Baseball. So, one of the games that comes to my attention was that Vanderbilt swept against the 2024 Men's College World Series champions Tennessee Vols in 3 walk-off wins in a row. One of them was when Logan Johnstone hit a walk-off RBI single, in which after 10 innings gave the Vanderbilt Commodores a 3-2 victory during Game 1. And then Game 2 of Vanderbilt against Tennessee, it was during 16th inning. 16 innings for a college baseball game? That is like longer than a Mariners-Tigers ALDS game from the past postseason. Anyways, during Game 2 of the Tennessee-Vanderbilt game, Mac Whitcomb hit a walk-off bunt, in which became an RBI single, in which gave Vanderbilt which gave Vanderbilt Commodores a 6-5 victory over Tennessee Vols. And then during Game 3, a series finale between Tennessee against Vanderbilt, Tommy Gooden, a sophomore pinch hitter, was at bat for Vanderbilt Commodores. The Commodores were down by 3 runs. Guess what he did? Let's see. Tommy Gooden has hit a walk-off grand slam. A walk-off grand slam to give Vanderbilt Commodores a 16-15 victory over the Tennessee Vols. This is historic for the Vanderbilt Commodores, who are now 16-12 in their win-loss record. And then the last thing we're going to be talking about is the standings for each conference of baseball. So now, for Mountain West Conference, so far, the San Diego State Aztecs were in second behind Air Force. San Diego State Aztecs and Air Force Falcons were competing for the number 1 spot as we play against the Air Force at 20-Win Stadium for the next weekend. Us, San Diego State Aztecs, have a 4-2 win-loss record in conference play. Air Force with a 5-1. Nevada, the Nevada Wolfpack are 5-3. They're tied with Washington State University. New Mexico Lobos had 3 wins, 2 losses, and a tie game. San Jose State had 3 wins and 3 losses. UNLV had 2 wins and 4 losses. GCU had 1 win and 5 losses. Fresno State with no wins, only 5 losses, and a tie game. Beware that the standings out of each conference are about to change, so be prepared for that. And now let's go to the SEC baseball standings. Texas Longhorns and the Georgia Bulldogs are tied for first place. They're both 7-2 in their conference play. Mississippi State comes in third place. For at this moment, they had 6 wins and 2 losses. Florida Gators and Alabama both were tied, with 6 wins and 3 losses. Texas A&M, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt were tied with 5 wins and 4 losses. And then Auburn, Oklahoma, Arkansas, and LSU, they're all 4 wins and 5 losses. Ole Miss had 3 wins and 5 losses. Tennessee Vols with 3 wins and 6 losses. They lost 3 more games after they're swept by Vanderbilt Commodores. Missouri and South Carolina Gamecocks were 1-8. South Carolina Gamecocks were swept by the Georgia Bulldogs. And so that brought the South Carolina Gamecocks down to last place. Again, South Carolina Gamecocks were tied with Missouri for last place. And then let's get to Big Ten. Let's get to Big Ten. And then, oh boy, Big Ten is something very interesting. UCLA had 12 wins and 0 losses, which is very impressive, mind-blowing for the number 1 team in the NCAA. Nebraska is in second place at this moment. USC had 10 wins and 2 losses. Oregon Ducks, who were last season's Big Ten champions, had 7 wins and 2 losses. Purdue with 7 wins and 5 losses. Illinois and Washington were tied with 6 wins and 6 losses. The rest had their losing records. And then in terms of Big 12, University of Central Florida, UCF, are in first place with 8 wins and 1 loss. West Virginia Mountaineers with 6 wins and 2 losses. Kansas with 6 wins and 3 losses. Arizona State Sun Devils, which will be our next opponent. The SDSU are going to be playing against Arizona State Sun Devils for tomorrow's game. They have a 5-3 win-loss record. TCU and Utah, as well as Baylor Bears, are tied with 5 wins and 4 losses. And the rest of those teams, including Texas Tech, BYU, Arizona, and Houston, they all have losing records at this moment. Last but not least, we got ACC. Florida State Seminoles are in first place at this moment with 8 wins and 1 loss. North Carolina Tar Heels with 9 wins and 3 losses. The Tar Heels are tied with Georgia Tech. And then we got Boston College, 8 wins and 4 losses. Virginia, 7 wins and 5 losses. Pitt Panthers with 5 wins and 4 losses. Wake Forest and Notre Dame are tied with 6 wins and 6 losses. And the rest of those teams, they lost more games than they won. So, that's going to be all for the live stream. Again, if you like this video and you want more of the baseball content and sports content, be sure to smash the like button, subscribe to my channel, and we'll see you on the next one. Good night, guys.